Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special gathering. Before we begin, I want to know who's here with me tonight. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. All right, let's get to the first story. Good evening, Dom. My name is Victor Souza, and I spent more than 10 years as the main leader of a humble church in a quiet region here in the United States. I won't mention the exact location where everything took place, nor will I reveal the name of the old building. What I can say is that I dedicated my heart to religious work from a very young age, to the point of becoming a reference for many around me. Those who saw me in a suit, carrying a Bible, never imagined that behind the appearance of a serious man, there was a human being struggling with his own weaknesses. In the beginning, I preached to half a dozen people in my parents' garage. There were no proper chairs, no fancy pulpit, no sound equipment. My Bible was practically taped together, and the guitar I used to sing was out of tune most of the time. Even so, those simple gatherings had something I would only fully understand years later: sincerity. Each word I spoke was born from genuine conviction, without worrying about praise or fame. As more people began to show up, we made some adjustments. One of the church members helped put up a small awning to protect us from the sun and rain. Someone donated a used speaker, another brought wooden benches. And so the congregation gradually grew. Along with it, I felt myself growing too. I started receiving invitations to preach elsewhere, and people mentioned that my voice conveyed a sense of confidence. All of that encouraged me to refine my speaking style. Over time, social media began playing an important role. There was always someone recording my services, posting snippets online, and a few people praised my way of speaking. Little by little, I noticed that preaching stopped being just a gathering of those seeking spiritual peace and was turning into a kind of spectacle. My name gained attention, and I got used to being called Pastor Victor, as though I was a special figure. At some point, I felt there was something more in me than just a simple gift. I thought of myself as almost untouchable. The spotlight on me increased when Raoul, a clever young man, offered to help with communications. He had a knack for marketing and suggested creating pages for the church. "Pastor, you need more exposure. Your services are full of impactful quotes, and that really draws people in." He recorded everything, edited the footage, added subtitles over bits of music as background, and used eye-catching titles. The result? More people attending services, more likes, and before I realized it, a bigger emphasis on my personal image. It was during that period I began to notice a change in myself. I abandoned that humble tone I once used in my parents' garage and started imposing my voice more intensely. The volume went up, my gestures were dramatic, and I addressed the congregation like I was in a battle. Catchy phrases became my greatest weapon. People reacted with excitement. Some said I had a special authority, that evil forces would stir when I prayed. I admit I liked hearing such comments and allowed them to settle in my mind. The problem was that, parallel to my image as a fervent man, I led a very different life when away from the public eye. I would come home exhausted, rip off my tie, and distract myself with pursuits I openly condemned in my sermons. I was always looking for something to make me forget the pressure of maintaining a holy aura. I justified it by saying these were minor flaws, that I only needed to pray and ask forgiveness the next morning. But deep down I knew there was a crack forming inside me. My wife, Lydia, was the first to notice my behavior changing. She remarked that my prayers at the breakfast table sounded mechanical, that my mood was unstable, and that I withdrew into silence when I should have been talking. I snapped back in a terse way, claiming I had too much work. The truth is, I no longer felt comfortable in her presence because I knew I was drowning in contradictions. On a Friday night, I left a meeting with some church leaders and decided to stop by the church before going home. Lydia texted me asking what I wanted for dinner. I replied absent-mindedly. When I parked the car, I saw something odd leaning against the side of the building. There was a small wooden box, wrapped in a reddish cloth, surrounded by a few candles that had gone out. It looked like some sort of ritual. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling a discomfort I couldn't explain. My immediate reaction was to grab my phone and call Raoul. "Can you come over here now? Bring your camera and a handheld mic. I think we can make a warning video." I hadn't even touched the object yet, but I was already imagining how I would present it. I'd show the package, say it was the work of the devil, and that I, as an anointed leader, would stomp on it without fear. I wanted to create the perfect narrative to generate engagement on social media. I wanted everyone to see how brave I was in the face of what I considered an offering from the enemy. Raoul arrived in just a few minutes, equipment in hand. It was drizzling, enough to keep the box damp. He quickly set up an improvised tripod. We went into the church, turned on a few lights, and placed the box right in the center before the altar. The red cloth looked stained in places, and inside were some objects I couldn't clearly identify. However, I wasn't concerned with figuring out what they were. I was focused on turning the moment into something dramatic. Raoul gave me the signal to start talking. I drew a breath and spoke with the same tone I used in services, denouncing opposing forces and boasting how I was above all of it. I acted like it was a performance. I even kicked the box, proclaiming it held no power over me. Part of me, a small part, whispered that I shouldn't be doing this, but my pride spoke louder. When it was all over, Raoul was thrilled with the video. "Pastor, this is going to go viral on social media. The way you spoke, it gives me goosebumps." I nodded with a forced smile, but I felt a strange tightness in my chest. Before leaving, I noticed Mrs. Paula, an older member of the congregation, sitting on a bench at the back of the church, half hidden in the dim light. She looked at me, not in shock, but with something like concern. As I walked past, she mumbled, "There are things you shouldn't kick, even if they're not yours." I pretended not to hear. I was so sure nothing could touch me that I dismissed her words outright. I went home carrying the video on my phone and a head full of plans. Lydia tried to talk to me during dinner, but I hardly said a word. I went upstairs, watched Raoul's edited footage. He cut some parts, added striking captions, and layered a heavy-sounding track. The title announced we had exposed a strange ritual outside the church. I put my phone down, satisfied, but also with a discomfort that wouldn't leave my throat. I lay down and tried to sleep. I felt too restless. I spent most of the night unable to really drift off. When I did doze, I had dreams that made little sense yet left me confused. People entering the church with covered faces, laughter echoing from unknown places. I woke up exhausted, not wanting to get out of bed. The next day I tried to act as though everything was normal, but a few incidents shattered my attempt. During the music rehearsal before the service, the microphone, which always worked fine, started failing whenever I tried to say something important. One of the overhead lights blew out, giving the cleaning staff quite a scare. I'm not one to read too much into coincidences, but I couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. Raoul, who was at the church to tweak the lighting, commented, "Pastor, things feel off today. It doesn't have a good vibe, you know." I shrugged, acting like I disagreed, but I noticed how he glanced around every so often, as if trying to sense where the unease was coming from. As the week went on, small problems started to multiply. Some of my closest people, who always took the front seats, told me they needed a break from the church. They didn't give clear reasons. It was as if everyone felt something had changed in the air. Among those who stopped attending was Mrs. Powler. I tried messaging her, but she only replied that she wasn't feeling well enough to join. I didn't push it. Lydia grew quieter at home. Occasionally she'd ask, "Victor, do you think you brought something bad into the church?" I would dodge the question, reciting standard lines about faith conquering all evil. But inside, I was starting to suspect I might have rushed headlong into a situation. At the same time, I couldn't bring myself to admit it out loud. One Sunday during the main service, a moment occurred that really stuck with me. I was preaching about perseverance, using my usual powerful voice, when I suddenly felt exhausted. My throat went dry, and the glass of water by the pulpit seemed warm, even though fans were running in the sanctuary. I tried to push on, but my words wouldn't come with the same conviction. My voice faltered. The congregation's eyes made me uncomfortable because I realized I wasn't radiating the confidence they were used to. To make matters worse, right when I tried to get my momentum back, the speakers emitted a piercing feedback noise, then went completely silent. The hush that followed was so tense, I could hear people murmuring, "This has never happened before." I had to finish without a microphone. I felt exposed because I was used to having my voice amplified. When it was over, many in the crowd got up and left without waiting for the final announcements. My already shaky temper got worse after that service. I gathered some church workers in a side room and tried to figure out what had gone wrong. One older man said the interference sounded like some kind of distortion, but he couldn't pinpoint the cause. Another mentioned that while adjusting the soundboard, he heard faint noises that sounded like muffled voices. I found it ridiculous, but saw he was genuinely pale. He wasn't the type to joke about such things. I left feeling angry and confused. Lydia remained cold at home. I holed up in the bedroom, opened social media, and read comments about the video Raoul had posted a few days earlier. There were compliments, but also people asking if I was overreacting, turning everything into a show. One criticism struck me. It said that true faith doesn't need performances, and I'd lost my essence. I turned off my phone, annoyed but unable to deny there was some truth to it. As days passed, I noticed my energy dwindling in alarming ways. The nights were restless. I rarely had vivid nightmares, but I woke up feeling just as tired as when I went to sleep, as if something was tormenting me from the inside. I also stopped opening my Bible to read regularly. When I tried, I couldn't focus. It was like I was there physically, but not really absorbing any words. Around that time, a trusted church worker, Sandro, came to tell me that some members had mentioned feeling uneasy in the sanctuary, especially near the altar. They say they can't concentrate on their prayers. They seem distracted, unmotivated. I answered curtly, they just need to pray more. If they had true faith, they wouldn't be feeling anything odd. Once he left, my heart felt heavier. I knew it wasn't just a lack of faith on their part. Something had changed, and deep down, I couldn't blame anyone but myself. Meanwhile, Raoul kept recording, but I saw his enthusiasm waning too. He told me the more recent videos weren't getting as many views, that people seemed less captivated by my speeches. "Pastor, I mean no disrespect, but you seem different, tired. You don't have those strong lines anymore." His words irritated me, and I told him to stop filming for a few days. I didn't want to see myself on screen. It was as if I was avoiding facing who I'd become. At home, Lydia and I hardly spoke. She went to bed early and I stayed in the bedroom with a small lamp on, my mind filled with endless thoughts that made no sense. One night, I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. I opened the door to check, saw nothing. Still, I hurried back inside and shut the door, unsettled. I didn't tell anyone. There was enough tension already. Eventually, I decided to call Mrs. Powler. I felt she had something to say about that box I'd found. I arranged to visit her on a Wednesday afternoon. She greeted me kindly, but I saw a mix of pity and concern in her eyes. We sat on a modest porch with plastic chairs. She served some tea and spoke plainly. "That box you kicked wasn't intended for the church. I think it was meant for someone else. But when you decided to turn it into a spectacle, you fed something that was already losing power." I stayed quiet, a tightness in my chest. She continued, "I'm not saying that box caused all your troubles. Actually, it just threw open a door you'd already left ajar." Those words stung. They reminded me of my hidden habits, my pride, my contradictory actions. I wanted to get up and leave, but I held my composure. She finished with, "If you want my advice, figure out what's inside you that's corroding everything. That's what truly feeds any evil." I went home with her words hammering in my head. I spent the night revisiting memories I'd been avoiding. I thought about all the times I let my vanity take the place that should have belonged to genuine faith. I recalled moments when Lydia tried to talk to me about our life, and I silenced her with rehearsed lines. In a way, I suspected my greatest enemy wasn't an external force, but my own behavior. Yet realizing this didn't mean I knew how to fix it. I felt like I was in a pit, unable to call out for divine help. The following Sunday, the congregation was noticeably sparse. Stepping up to the altar, I felt a pang looking at rows of empty seats. The few people present seemed uninterested. I tried to conduct the service as usual, but everything came out mechanical. At the end, no one approached to greet me except Sandro, who offered a sympathetic glance. That was when I decided to do something I never imagined, seek help outside my comfort zone. There was a man in the neighborhood named Mr. Dario, known for spiritual practices very different from ours. He had a small place where people went for advice and prayers. For a long time I viewed him as a kind of rival, even avoiding walking on the same side of the street. But I remembered Mrs. Powler's phrase about looking inside myself. Maybe by talking to someone entirely removed from my world, I'd find an answer. On a Monday afternoon, I mustered my courage and knocked on the iron gate leading into Mr. Dario's place. A young man recognized me and let me in. I wasn't exactly afraid, but I was uneasy, sensing I was stepping into territory I had always condemned. The place was simple, lacking any over-the-top elements. There was a smell of burning herbs that I found slightly irritating, and I heard distant chanting, though I couldn't make out the words. I waited until Mr. Dario came to speak with me. He appeared in plain clothes, wearing a calm expression, as if he already knew I was coming. I sat on a small wooden stool, took a deep breath and said, "You may know who I am. I lead the church nearby." He nodded, unruffled. "I do. How can I help you?" I couldn't bring myself to hide anything. I told him about the box, the video, the congregation's discouragement, my secret behaviors. I spoke of the imbalance I felt, the uncertainty about whether I was under a malign influence. He listened quietly. When I was finished, he paused for a few seconds like someone meditating, then spoke words that stuck with me. "There are rituals that lose their strength if they're not fed, but you fed this one by using it as a trophy. More importantly, your own vanity fed it. A divided heart opens doors without even noticing. It hit me like a blow. I realized there was no point blaming the box or whoever placed it there. The real crack came from within me. Mr. Dario looked at me firmly and added, "If you genuinely want to cleanse your church, start by cleansing your life. Objects are just objects. Power comes from the person handling them." I left certain that my biggest challenge would be admitting my mistakes and making a change. I recognized I'd nurtured my pride for a long time, and now I was paying the price. There was no magic fix. I had to face it honestly without theatrics. That night I barely slept. Lydia noticed my distress, sat beside me and asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" She wasn't angry, just sad. I held her hand and confessed, "I've been acting like I'm more important than I really am. I lied to myself, saying I was strong. I brushed aside the signs around me." She listened silently. We stayed that way for several minutes, not speaking, just laying our hearts bare. That moment marked the beginning of our reconciliation, though I still had a long road ahead. The next day I made the hardest decision of my journey. I asked Raul to delete most of the videos we'd posted. "But Pastor, those videos reached a wide audience." "I know, Raul, but I don't want people watching those staged moments anymore. I need to start over without all the showmanship." He was surprised and tried to get me to reconsider, but I was determined. Erasing what made me popular wasn't easy, but I felt it was a necessary step. I also sent messages to some people who had stepped away, apologizing for the times I went overboard or spoke arrogantly. Not all responded, but a few thanked me and said they needed time to see if this was genuine. It was tough to hear, but understandable. I had built up a pompous image, losing authenticity long ago. I went back to the church one night knowing it would be empty. I didn't turn on the bright lights, nor did I bring a microphone. I walked through the rows, noticing the dust on the benches. The emptiness stung, reminding me of how the place used to be full of applause. I sat on a wooden step near the altar and closed my eyes. I stayed there, speechless, feeling the weight of my choices. After a few minutes, I felt a need to pray, not with the voice I used to project, but silently. I laid bare everything I'd been hiding, my fears, my shame, my regret for bringing something strange into the church and for exploiting people's trust. In the following days, I decided to close the church for renovations. I announced that we were going through a restructuring process. I didn't make a big video about it. I simply sent out messages and taped a small sign on the door. During this period, I abandoned my role as the absolute leader. I asked a group of church workers to help me clean up the place. Lydia joined in too, sorting through old objects and stacked papers. While cleaning, I found the red cloth that had once covered the box I'd kicked. Someone had picked it up and tossed it into storage. My stomach turned cold at the memory of how I handled that situation. I decided to burn it outside, not as a dare, but as a way to get rid of a bad memory. There were no manifestations, no eerie sounds. It was a simple burning, and I saw it as a symbol that I needed to move on. After a few weeks, we reopened under a new name, House of Truth and Care. Nothing flashy, just something that conveyed the essence I now sought. At the reopening service, around 20 people showed up. I was ready to speak, but not in my old theatrical style. I held a small sheet of verses and began telling them, honestly, what had happened over the past months. I didn't exaggerate or embellish. I said I'd been consumed by pride, that I'd let fame go to my head, and I'd mixed my own inner conflicts with that strange object at our door. I explained that the bigger issue was inside me, not in the box itself. Some people seemed surprised, others looked skeptical, but I saw a glimmer of hope on Lydia's face. As I spoke, I realized I didn't need to shout or use showy lines to be heard. When I finished, there was no applause, just a thoughtful silence. Two ladies came up and said they understood my point. A young man thanked me for being honest. For me, that was a good start. A while later, Mrs. Paula returned to attend services. After one gathering, she stood up at the end and offered a brief prayer, asking that all arrogance be driven away and only truth flourish. It was simple, no big commotion. I thanked her, feeling a calm resolve, knowing I needed that blessing. Raoul also came back, this time without a camera. He said he missed the services and understood my current purpose. We didn't dwell on the past, because it was clear we wouldn't return to our old methods. Nowadays he helps once in a while, just running ambient sound, no live broadcasts. As for Mr. Dario, I never got close to him, but I stopped viewing him as the enemy. I've passed by his street a few times, waved hello, and he waved back. I think we both understand each person has their own path, and respect can exist even between different beliefs. Today, Lydia and I are rebuilding our relationship. She joins me for some of the community work our small congregation organizes. We're not large, and we don't have spotlights, but that doesn't bother me anymore. I'd rather guide a handful of dedicated people than gather crowds with empty promises. When people ask what changed, I say, almost everything. The biggest shift happened inside me when I realized much of what I labeled as a spiritual attack was actually the consequence of my own pride. I won't pretend everything turned around overnight. I still face tough days, moments of doubt and anxiety. But the atmosphere is lighter, and people no longer talk about weird phenomena or microphones breaking at just the wrong time. It's as if, by cleaning out my own heart, I also cleansed the space where I stand. One morning I ran into Mrs. Paula in the entryway and she commented, "It's good to see you praying without fanfare, without shouting. That way we can tell it's real." I just smiled. I didn't need to say a word because I was learning that not every act of faith requires a speech. What remains most important from this story is the lesson I learned about ego. It's easy to think you're special when people applaud you. It's easy to use faith as a cover for what's wrong inside your heart. But that only holds up a fragile facade. When something unexpected comes along, be it a strange object in a box, a ritual by the door, or even a critical comment online, that facade cracks, exposing the flaws we pretended not to see. Now I look back on that episode as a turning point. I understand that the real battle isn't with the outside world, but with the inclinations within me. If I hadn't been so wrapped up in myself, that box wrapped in red cloth would have been a curious event, nothing more. But my arrogance turned it into a trigger for my downfall. I had to take that fall to see that my pride was the true enemy. My name is still Victor Souza, but if anyone ever calls me pastor again, let it be because they see sincerity in my character, not because I put on a performance at the pulpit. I've stopped chasing the spotlight and am now working on just being a faithful servant, ready to listen and care for those who come seeking relief. The house of truth and care remains small, but free from gimmicks, and honestly, that's all I want. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. Good evening, Dom. My name is Rachel Duarte. I've always been convinced that my life's purpose was to be a mother. When I was a child, I would spend hours playing at taking care of dolls, cradling pillows in my lap as if they were babies, dreaming of feeling a child grow inside me. I married young, at 23, but it took a long time to achieve the stability my husband and I thought necessary to start a family. I work as a seamstress from home, and my husband, Sergio, does labor at a nearby quarry. We don't have much, but we work hard and have never lacked the basics. Over time, we became certain it was time to try. Sergio and I followed every medical recommendation available at our local clinics. We went through exams and checkups, but nothing indicated a specific problem. The months dragged on, 1 year, 2 years, 3, without success. In our small rural American community, there's a tradition of turning to herbal teas, infusions, and blessings when conventional medicine fails. Every older lady had her miraculous recipe, and in my eagerness to get pregnant, I tried every suggestion I received. I prepared baths with orange leaves, sage tea, rosemary tea, dandelion root, and even mugwort. Sometimes I woke up with a bitter taste in my mouth because the previous day had been dedicated to swallowing strange homemade concoctions. Some neighbors even suggested petal baths and candles lit in the backyard. I did all of that without complaint, just so no one would say later that I was stubborn and refused to try something. But in the end, nothing changed. I kept dreaming of seeing a positive result on an over-the-counter pregnancy test that never turned out positive. One hot afternoon, while I was selling some handmade items at a local craft fair, a woman I only knew by sight, named Fern, approached me with a look that suggested she had important secrets. "There's someone in town who can solve your problem," she said. She never used the word witch, but she mentioned an older lady known for helping women who couldn't conceive. She assured me this person didn't charge much, but that faith was essential. I listened carefully, not wanting to get my hopes up. Still, I wrote down the address on a small piece of paper. I told Sergio about the conversation. He looked at me with skepticism. We had tried so many things already, and all of them seemed useless. But deep down, we were both tired of waiting, and the thought of any extra help, even if questionable, started to circle our minds. He finally gave in when he realized that, at least, I'd stop blaming myself if it failed again. On the agreed day, he drove me near the place but couldn't stay with me. He needed to work, and it was over an hour's drive back. I promised I'd manage on my own. I stood there, in front of a simple wooden house aged with time, its yard full of banana trees and chickens wandering around. On the porch, a few women waited. They looked tired and hopeful. I got in line, not really knowing what would happen once it was my turn. While I waited, I hardly spoke to anyone. However, in front of me was a very talkative young woman who wouldn't rest until she struck up a conversation. Her name was Yara. She was roughly my age and worked as a manicurist in the next town over. We talked about our attempts to conceive, about frustrating tests and appointments. She told me she'd heard of another woman who had been helped by this folk healer, someone supposedly miraculous. That day the line was huge and the heat was unbearable, but I ended up feeling less lonely thanks to her company. When Yara's turn finally came, she wished me luck and went inside. About 20 minutes later, she came out looking a bit shaken. I approached to find out how it went, but she didn't say much, only gestured that she'd wait for me outside. Then I went in, filled with questions in my mind. Inside, the owner of the house, who introduced herself as Ramona, greeted me. She was a woman in her early 60s, with tanned skin and graying hair tied back in a low bun. The air smelled of incense mixed with some kind of burning herb. She asked me to share a bit of my story, so I told her about my struggles to get pregnant. She just nodded while listening, sifting through a bundle of dried herbs on the table. Suddenly, she began to pray in a low voice, waving a smoky bundle of herbs around my body. She traced a few signs with her fingers on my back and belly, as if drawing something in the air. I didn't understand anything, but I kept quiet, trying not to interrupt. Afterward, she said she sensed a strong possibility of motherhood for me, but that my energy was blocked by some unease. She handed me a small cloth pouch tied with a red ribbon and told me to put it under my pillow. She also gave me a vial with a yellowish bitter liquid, saying I should drink it for 7 nights before bed. I paid a small fee she asked for and left, still confused but strangely hopeful. Outside, I found Yara. She invited me over for some juice at her house, which was close by, while we both waited for our rides. I agreed. There, she confided that Ramona hadn't been very optimistic with her, saying Yara would need more than 1 session because something was blocking her womb that wouldn't be solved by that first ritual. I felt empathy. Though I barely knew Yara, her pain was the same as mine. From that day on, Yara and I got closer. We texted each other nearly every day. She asked how I was reacting to the remedy, and I asked if she had gone back to see the folk healer. We became friends with a speed that surprised me. Most of the women I knew already had children, and I felt I couldn't open up about my difficulty conceiving without getting meaningless advice. With Yara, it was different. We were in the same boat, and that comforted me. After nearly 2 months, I noticed my cycle was late. I took an over-the-counter pregnancy test and for the first time saw that positive result. I was in shock. I showed it to Sergio, who laughed, cried, and hugged me all at once. We didn't know if it would hold or if it might end quickly, but a medical confirmation soon arrived. I was pregnant, just over 4 weeks along. When I told Yara, she fell silent for a few seconds. Then she forced a smile and said, "I deserved that blessing." I thanked her for all her support, but I could tell she was a bit down. I didn't blame her because I would feel the same if she got pregnant and I still hadn't. To ease the tension, I suggested we keep looking for solutions for her together, that I would go with her anywhere. She thanked me but changed the subject quickly. Days went by. I felt a mix of joy and worry. Every cramp in my belly made me anxious, afraid I'd lose the baby. Some people in town started telling me I should go back to Ramona to give thanks. Others recommended praying to Saint Jude, drinking more cinnamon tea, or buying saint medals. The curious part was that Yara stopped mentioning the healer or any new attempts. She was always evasive. One evening, she showed up at my house with a gift, a small amulet made of dark cloth, sewn tightly as if something were inside. She said it was a protective charm for pregnancy, that she'd received it from an acquaintance and now wanted to pass it on to me. "It's to keep away any envy or the evil eye," she said. I found it kind of her, but deep down I felt strange holding that piece of fabric. It smelled a bit musty, yet I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I smiled and thanked her, saying I'd keep it in a drawer. Later that same night, I suddenly felt sick. I rushed to the bathroom. Sergio thought it was normal, just a typical pregnancy nausea. Even so, the sensation was different, more unsettling. I felt ill for almost an hour, but then I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up thinking I'd heard some noise in the yard. I didn't even get up. I just tried to go back to sleep. But my heart was racing. Next day, while I was sweeping the house, I noticed small marks on the ground out in the yard, as if someone had stepped in the moist dirt. They didn't look like any animal prints I knew. They were oddly triangular. I showed them to Sergio, but he shrugged, saying it could be a dog with a malformed paw or something. Even so, I couldn't get it out of my head, as though those prints had a dark presence. I covered them with a piece of cardboard and went on with my day. That same week, Yara invited me to spend the afternoon at her place. She said she had a surprise. When I arrived, she served me a very hot vegetable broth, saying it was good for pregnant women. With each spoonful, I tasted a bitterness in my throat that bothered me. She kept watching me eat. Halfway through the bowl, I excused myself to use the bathroom. There, I felt stomach pains and broke out in a cold sweat. When I returned, Yara asked if I was okay. I didn't want to worry her, but the look on her face made me uneasy. She stared at me intently, like she was analyzing me. I said I preferred not to finish eating. She didn't insist. We talked about random topics until at one point she commented, "Sometimes I used to wonder what you'd be like without this obsession with motherhood." Her words sounded harsh, but she quickly said it was just a figure of speech. Before I could probe further, she changed the subject again. When I got home, my stomach hurt even more. I had a fever that night. Sergio tried to take me to the clinic, but we couldn't get his boss's car in time. Yara swore that I'd just suddenly passed out, denying there was anything strange in that soup. Both of them downplayed the situation, but I knew something was off. As time passed, Yara became even more distant. Whenever I talked about the baby, she fell silent, gazing at the floor. Once, I mentioned I had a feeling it was going to be a girl. She let out a humorless laugh and said, "Sometimes we get what we don't deserve." Those words hit me like a stone. I asked what she meant, and she just shook her head, avoiding the subject. Deep down, I understood what was going on. She felt it was unfair that I got pregnant while she did not. I even offered to help her financially if she wanted to seek a specialist in a larger city, but she refused, saying she didn't like charity. Even so, I wanted to keep the friendship. As time went on and my belly grew, my sense of insecurity grew with it. I couldn't sleep well. I had nightmares about shadows in my bedroom, muffled laughter in the dark corners of the house. I woke up startled, unsure if I had dreamed it. Sergio said it was normal to have fears during pregnancy, but something inside me screamed that this was more than just anxiety. On a random afternoon, Yara showed up unannounced, bringing bags of fruits and vegetables. She said she wanted to cook me a special lunch since I kept complaining I had almost no appetite. "I'll make it all with extra care, you'll see," she told me. I found it odd given the tension between us, but I accepted. I went to take a shower while she cooked. Midway through, a strong smell of burning incense invaded the bathroom. I rushed out and saw the house filled with a whitish smoke. I yelled Yara's name, but I didn't see her anywhere. I walked further until I spotted her silhouette in the kitchen, covering her face with a cloth, waving off the smoke. I came closer, my vision blurry, and collapsed. I only recall feeling my breath weaken. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on my bed. Sergio and Yara were there, looking shocked and relieved. He explained that according to Yara, there had just been a minor mishap with a pot, but there was no actual fire, only smoke. My husband tried to take me to the clinic but couldn't borrow his boss's car in time. Yara swore I simply fainted out of nowhere and denied there was anything unusual about the smoke. Both of them minimized it, but I knew something was very wrong. After that episode, I started having even stranger feelings. One night, I woke with the sense that someone was standing outside our bedroom window. It wasn't just the wind or an animal passing by. It was more like a faint scraping sound against the wall in a steady rhythm. I called Sergio's name, but he was sound asleep. I got up slowly and looked through the crack of the window without turning on the light so as not to reveal my presence. All I saw was the dark yard, nothing I could make out clearly. I lay back down, but every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something gently scratching the wooden window frame, as if nails were dragging slowly across it. That was one of the worst nights of my life. Next morning I told Sergio everything, and he guessed it might have been some animal, urging me to stay calm because stress could harm the pregnancy. Still, I couldn't forget. I went out into the yard in daylight, searching for tracks or marks on the walls, but found nothing, only a heavy atmosphere I couldn't explain. Part of me wanted to go back to Ramona and ask if the initial ritual might have opened some negative door. But another part was too scared to find out if that would only make things worse. Around the 3rd month, I started experiencing severe nausea and frequent pains. My tests showed the baby was still developing, but I was growing weaker by the day. The doctor at the clinic told me to be extra careful, drink more water and avoid exhaustion. Sergio took on more chores around the house, but he couldn't quit his job. I was constantly worn out, and sometimes I got sudden chills, even on warm days. At one prenatal appointment, the nurse asked if I was taking any herbal teas or home remedies without professional guidance, since my blood work showed odd changes. I said no, though I had once used the bitter yellow liquid Ramona gave me, but that was long gone. The nurse advised caution because any unregulated substance might harm the fetus. I started feeling guilty, wondering if that initial folk remedy had been a bad idea. One afternoon, while organizing my closet, I found that dark cloth amulet Yara had given me, still in a drawer. I picked it up and felt a sudden dizziness, like a feverish spell. I decided to open it to see what was inside. It was sewn with strong thread, so I used a small embroidery scissor to clip the stitches. What I found unsettled me. A mix of dried leaves, pieces of what looked like nails or tiny bones, and a smaller cloth stained with a red substance that didn't look like dye. I was horrified. I couldn't tell if it was meant to be a good luck charm or something far more sinister. That very day I tried calling Yara, attempting to keep my panic hidden, but she didn't pick up. I sent her messages, with no response. Part of me wanted to toss that bundle in the trash, but I was afraid of making something worse when I didn't understand it. In the end, I wrapped everything in a white cloth and placed it on a high shelf in my closet. Nearly a week went by without any word from her. Then Yara showed up at my door. She said she was dealing with personal problems, looking exhausted with deep circles under her eyes. I asked her about the amulet, explaining that I'd opened it. She gave me a furious look and snapped, "You should never have done that. Those things aren't meant for someone who doesn't understand the spiritual side." I told her I didn't mean any harm, but I couldn't help asking why she'd given me something so strange. She replied, irritated, "Don't you realize how many people out there want what you have? I just wanted to protect you from jealousy." Her expression was harsh, almost hostile. I held back from pressing further, frightened by her attitude. Deep down, I also felt angry for having received such a macabre object without understanding its nature. My stomach pains worsened, and I began having light bleeding off and on with no clear explanation. The doctor at the clinic advised total rest. Sergio tried staying home as much as possible, but we had bills to pay, so he went to work praying nothing would happen to me. I grew weaker, sometimes shaking in bed even when it wasn't cold. One afternoon, alone at home, I felt a sharp pain low in my belly. I tried standing, but my vision blurred. I leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. Then I heard a noise in the backyard, something like a bucket being kicked. My immediate thought was that maybe Yara had come again. I moved slowly to the back door and noticed the latch was undone. I opened it. No one was there, but a wave of panic overtook me. I went back inside. When I reached the bedroom, I found Yara by the bedside, her hands on something on my nightstand. She turned to me, startled, like she'd been caught red-handed. I asked what she was doing there. She said the door was open and she came to check on me. I noticed a small bottle in her hand, filled with a dark liquid. Before I could say anything, she moved toward me, trying to force it into my mouth. I fought back, but my strength was depleted. She pressed on my belly exactly where the pain throbbed, making me scream for her to stop. I couldn't properly defend myself. Everything was spinning in my head. Yara looked at me with a desperate gaze and muttered, "Don't you see this baby could have been mine? It's not fair." The last thing I recall was the bitter taste sliding down my throat and a searing pain in my abdomen. Then I blacked out. When I came to, I was in the hospital in the next town. Sergio was sitting by my bed holding my hand. The moment he saw me awake, his eyes teared up. He told me I had arrived unconscious, brought in by a neighbor who heard my screams and ran in when he saw Yara flee. The doctors couldn't save the baby. They said there had been substantial bleeding and it wasn't entirely clear why, but my uterus was seriously damaged. Sergio told the authorities what had happened, but nothing moved forward right away, as Yara had disappeared without a trace. I refused to believe what I was hearing. I cried so hard I ran out of strength. Sergio tried to console me, but he was shattered too. The doctor explained that due to the internal injuries, it would now be highly unlikely I'd ever conceive again. It felt like all my hopes and dreams were flowing straight down the drain at once. I went back home, but I couldn't stand staying there for long. Every corner reminded me of my brief period of happiness when I was pregnant and the tragedy that followed. At Sergio's urging, we moved to another place near a highway that made his job more accessible. Some people in our old town said they saw Yara escaping toward a back road. They reported it to local authorities, but there were no conclusive leads. Months later, someone claimed to have seen her far away, apparently pregnant. My body slowly healed, but my heart did not. I lived in constant fear. I barely slept, trembling at the slightest noise in the night. The faith I once had in life steadily faded. Sergio tried to raise my spirits by talking about adoption, but I couldn't even consider it. It was as if motherhood itself repelled me, so painful was the memory of what was taken from me. Sometimes I thought about going back to Ramona, demanding explanations about what really happened, but it wouldn't have changed anything. I felt that path would only deepen my suffering. Instead, I sought help in a nearby church, speaking with a priest but not sharing the whole story, just that I had been the victim of a great injustice. He prayed for me and asked me to forgive those who had wronged me. I pretended to agree, but deep down I couldn't do it yet. Faced with my panic attacks, I eventually turned to another folk healer in the area, someone who claimed devotion to the saints and helped people break the power of envy. I told her the basics of what had happened. She performed a strong prayer, used salt water to bless my hands, and asked for deliverance. She recommended 9 days of herbal baths, praying with faith, and staying away from whatever triggered painful memories. I began these rituals, and indeed my sense of terror started to wane. I stopped having so many nightmares. I managed to return to my seamstress work, taking orders for baby outfits. Though in the beginning it made me cry alone at night, remembering my loss. Sometime later, a distant cousin who lives in the countryside came to see me. She also struggled with fertility and asked for advice, having heard I'd tried various treatments. She wanted to know if I was aware of any famous healers. I hesitated but ended up telling her plainly that she should seek proper medical help and be wary of miraculous solutions. I didn't go into detail, but I made it clear I'd had a tragic experience. I spared her the complete story. Gradually, I realized there was no point in holding on to hatred or seeking revenge against Yara. She was gone, and dwelling on those memories only made me sicker inside. I decided I had to keep going, even if scarred. Sergio and I continued our lives in our new home. He still carries a deep sadness for not being able to protect me that day. I assure him it wasn't his fault. None of us expected something so cruel, especially from someone we considered a friend. Today I bear a pain that can't be erased, but I try to turn it into a warning for other women who, like me, dream of motherhood and end up vulnerable to any promise of a miracle. We joined a support group, and I offered to talk with others facing similar grief or trauma. Whenever the memories suffocate me, I invest my energy in sewing, spending time with Sergio, or sitting before a small statue of the Virgin Mary I keep in the living room. I may never fully heal from what happened, but I've learned that if I don't push myself to move forward, I'll remain forever trapped in the darkness of a past I did not choose. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. My name is Emmanuel, and time has already bent my back a bit, leaving me past 40, marked by the sun and the salt. My entire life was shaped by this place, a remote corner of the country that progress forgot, where a lazy river gives itself to the ocean and spreads into a maze of tangled roots, dark mud, and brackish water folks around here call the mangrove swamp. The house I live in, an inheritance from my father, who was born and died a fisherman in these parts, is made of simple wood, weathered by time, raised on strong stilts to outwit the stubbornness of the fullest tides. To reach the nearest small town, a fishing community with a little church and a couple of general stores, you have to walk a good 2 hours along the trail that winds between the marshy stretch and the beginning of the mangroves, or a bit less if the tide helps you by boat. I only go there when I really need to, sell the weekly catch, buy kerosene for the lantern, salt, flour, and whatever else nature around here doesn't provide. I grew up hearing the sound of crabs scuttling in the mud and the whistle of the wind in the dry branches of the mangroves. I figured my fate was mapped out just like my father's, live and die here, alongside a partner, watching our children grow and learn the secrets of the river and the sea. For a while I thought I'd found that peace, but life, like a treacherous tide, has a way of turning everything upside down when you least expect it. I met Larissa at the annual Fisherman's Festival held in honor of Saint Peter down in the town. She couldn't have been more than 19. I was already past 30. She wasn't from here. She'd arrived with her family from who knows where, looking for a new direction. She was petite, but had a presence that drew everyone's attention. Her smile seemed capable of lighting up the darkest night, and she moved with a natural sway that was almost a dance. She didn't talk much, her voice was soft, but she held your gaze, and that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. I was smitten foolishly and fast. It was like I was hooked by an invisible fishing line. We started meeting up every time I went to town. It gave me an excuse to go more often, even when I didn't have much fish to sell. We'd sit on the low wall near the church, and she'd tell me about her dreams of having a tidy home, children running around. I'd talk about the river, the tides, my peaceful little spot. It didn't take 6 months before she moved in with me, bringing a bundle of clothes and many plans. The house, previously silent and half abandoned, smelling of fish and loneliness, gained color. The aroma of good food cooking on the wood stove, and the sound of her laughter echoing against the wooden walls. I insisted she shouldn't have to do the heavy work, going out on the boat, cleaning fish, fixing nets. That was my job. She had gentle hands, and I believed she deserved a rest after helping raise her younger siblings from an early age. I used to say, all proud, "As long as I have the strength to haul this net, Larissa, you won't lack anything, neither you nor our own." And I pushed myself to keep that promise. I fixed the house up as best I could, whitewashed the walls, made a small herb garden in the back that she loved to take care of. I built a sturdier footbridge over the creek that the tide often filled. Every Saturday when I got back from town, even if sales had been meager, I'd bring her a treat, a piece of patterned fabric for a new dress, a jar of milk caramel spread, or a fragrant soap from the bigger stores. Sometimes she didn't even ask. I'd see something at the general store, imagine her smile, and take it home. My life revolved around her. Soon the children came along. First Ethan, a mischievous, curious boy. 2 years later, Sophia, quieter, more observant. Both had my features, but the lively spark in their eyes was all their mother's. They grew up free, bare feet sinking in the mud at low tide, chasing little blue crabs, climbing the low branches in the marsh. I'd come home from fishing exhausted, but seeing those three at the doorstep waiting for me made any effort worthwhile. Larissa was a good mother most of the time. She took care of them, bathed them, told them stories. But I can't say exactly when, maybe after Sophia started walking and talking, something began to change. Subtly at first. She grew quieter, more distant. She'd spend hours sitting in the porch hammock, staring at the mangroves, at the slow flow of water through the channels, with an empty look that seemed to see nothing there. Her easy smile grew rare. I guessed it was the loneliness of this place, the lack of conversation with other women, the unchanging routine. I tried to make up for it. I stayed home more often, cut back on longer fishing trips, took them more regularly to town on weekends so she could visit her family and stroll in the little square. But it was like trying to fill a leaking pitcher. Her joy seemed to seep out through some invisible crack I couldn't find. It was around that time the strangeness started showing clearer signs, like a dead fish floating on the tide. Little things you try to sweep under the rug of daily life. One day, coming home early because of a sudden downpour, I caught a strong whiff of cheap sweet men's cologne inside the house. Definitely not mine, and it clashed with the usual smell of sea air and wood smoke. I asked her, and she dodged the question, said it must be some new cleaning product her mother had given her. I swallowed it. Another time I found a cigarette butt from a brand you only get at the pricey store in town, crushed near the path leading down to the small dock where I tie up my boat. I didn't smoke that brand. Larissa hated cigarettes. She said it must belong to some boatman passing through. A weak excuse, but I wanted to believe it. The human mind is stubborn. We cling to the image we built, to the peace we want to preserve. But the signs kept coming, like barnacles attaching themselves to a hull. She began to dress up more when going to town, spent more time at her mother's place, came back with gifts I hadn't given her, with vague stories about friends I'd never heard of. Sometimes her eyes had a different, elusive sparkle, and the distance between us in the hammock at night seemed to grow day by day. I was tipped into the abyss of truth without even realizing how far I'd fall, by Gil, a decent guy, a family man who'd been buying my fish in town for years. One Saturday morning, while we picked out the best mullet and settled up at the makeshift pier, he pulled me aside, looking awkward and scratching his head. "Hey, Emmanuel, can I tell you something with all due respect?" "Sure, Gil, what is it?" Well, there's a new guy working at Mr. James's store, someone named Ryan. He's been talking a lot about your wife. You know how people in a small town love to gossip, right? They exaggerate, make stuff up. But he speaks with a certain intimacy, you get me? He says she's real pretty, great to talk to, different from the local girls. I didn't want to worry you, but I figured I should warn you. Keep your eyes open, my friend, that's all. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. The noise of other fishermen, the screech of the gulls, everything disappeared. I felt a chill run up my spine despite the blazing sun overhead. I thanked Gil, my voice catching in my throat, shoved the money into my pocket without even counting it, and went back home, rowing slowly, heart heavy as an anchor stone. His words echoed in my mind. Intimacy. Different. Keep your eyes open. Each stroke of the oar seemed to confirm my worst suspicions. That night was the longest of my life. The mangrove swamp, which had always been a silent companion, suddenly felt ominous. Every rustle in the mud, every owl's screech, every whisper of wind through gnarled branches felt like a mocking murmur. I looked at Larissa sleeping beside me, so peaceful on the surface, and felt a knot in my throat, a mix of love, anger, and a deep sadness. The next day, I made up some excuse about needing a part for the boat's motor and went to town earlier than usual. I didn't go straight to the store. I watched from afar. And there he was, Ryan. Brown-haired, slender build, younger than me, maybe 25. He was stacking some sacks outside the store, whistling. It was the same tune Larissa had been humming at home lately. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away fast, almost guilty. I didn't need anything more. The certainty struck me like lightning. I didn't speak to him, didn't make a scene. I turned around, climbed back into my boat and headed home, rowing hard, fueled by anger I hadn't known I possessed, yet nauseous to my core. What tore me up inside wasn't just the betrayal, the breaking of trust. It was the place. It happened there, under my own roof. In my house, my refuge, the place I built with my sweat to shelter my family. While I was out working on the sea, bringing home our living, she brought someone else into our intimacy. I felt like a complete fool, the last to know. I pictured the town gossip, the pitying or mocking looks from other fishermen. The shame burned more than the midday sun. How could I have been so blind? We get used to someone's presence, the daily routine, and we just stop truly seeing. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. I considered abandoning everything, taking the children and disappearing, confronting her right there in front of everyone, going after that guy and settling it the old-fashioned way. But then I'd look at my kids' innocent faces in the midst of that dirty mess, and my hands shook. My courage turned to water. I spent days in that internal hell, pretending nothing was happening while dying inside. I watched her every move, every word, looking for confirmation where there was no more doubt. She seemed to sense my suspicion and became more guarded, more defensive. The atmosphere at home grew heavy, suffocating. The final confirmation came on a sweltering, humid afternoon, the kind that warns of an approaching storm. I'd said I would spend the night fishing farther away, but my restlessness wouldn't let me go. I took the boat out for a bit and then came back quietly, just as the sun was going down, painting the sky orange and purple. I left the boat hidden in a side creek and walked in along the back trail, the one almost nobody uses. The silence was thick, broken only by mosquito buzz and the distant sound of water. The kids were playing near the herb patch, oblivious to everything. I crept to the window of our bedroom, the one that faces the mangrove tangle. My heart pounded in my chest, hurting. I took a deep breath and peeked through the shutter, and there she was, laughing, whispering softly with her head resting on Ryan's shoulder. He was sitting in my hammock, the one I had woven myself. The sight hit me like a wave at high tide. I didn't feel the rage to break everything. I felt an immense emptiness, a hollow pain, like something had been torn out from inside me. I don't know where I found the strength, but I walked into the house, not through the front door, but through the back kitchen. They were startled. He jumped out of the hammock, hastily straightening his clothes, pale as a ghost. Larissa stared at me, eyes wide in surprise, then they hardened in defiance. I was shaking from head to toe, but my voice came out low and steady, loaded with the pain that was consuming me. "Pack up your things, Larissa. Take what's yours and get out of my sight. Now." He didn't wait for a second warning. He fled through the front door, practically tripping over himself, never looking back. Larissa started shouting, hurling accusations. She said I was an absent husband, an ignorant brute who only cared about work, that she felt lonely and unhappy in this God-forsaken place, that it was my fault she went looking for comfort elsewhere, that I never really loved her. She spat venomous words, aiming to wound me where she knew it would hurt. Funny how her unhappiness here never stopped her from wearing the clothes I bought, eating the food I brought, living under the roof I kept over her head. "Leave, Larissa, just go," I repeated, voice choking but firm. She began throwing her clothes into a bundle, furious tears streaming, cursing me non-stop. The noise drew the kids inside from the herb patch, scared. Ethan, the eldest, clung to my leg, trembling. Sophia cried loudly, calling for her mother. Larissa passed by them as if they were invisible, grabbed her bundle, and headed for the little dock. She untied an old boat kept there and started rowing toward town against the weak, outgoing tide. I stood in the doorway watching the boat get smaller until it vanished around the bend in the river. The silence that remained was deafening. I looked at my children clinging to me, tears of confusion on their faces. I knelt down on the dirt floor of the kitchen, pulled them close, and broke down. I wept for the betrayal, the broken family, my blindness, the sudden return of solitude, now more bitter than ever. The days that followed were like a waking nightmare. Trying to care for two small children, the house and my fishing work all at once with my heart in pieces, was nearly impossible. My aunt, Aunt Cora, my father's sister, a woman of few words and immense strength, came as soon as she heard. She lived in a tiny place closer to town, but didn't think twice about packing up and moving in. She asked no nosy questions, passed no judgments. She simply took over the kitchen, cared for the kids with quiet affection, and mended my nets and my spirit bit by bit with her simple faith and constant presence. She'd whisper prayers before bed, and that soft murmur was the only thing that brought some peace to that sorrowful house. Larissa, as expected, did not keep quiet. She spread her version of the story around town, painted herself as a victim, claiming I was a possessive and jealous monster who threw her out on a whim, said I was violent, me who never laid a hand on her despite everything. Her parents, who never really liked me because I was just a humble fisherman with no future, came to the riverbank making a scene, shouting and threatening that they'd take the children from me. Aunt Cora was the one who faced them down on the wooden bridge leading to the house. With a quiet fierceness, she said a few choice words, reminded them of the shame their daughter had caused, and told them to mind their own business and leave my family in peace. They left grumbling, but they didn't come back. The kids missed their mother terribly. They cried at night, asked about her all the time. Ethan sulked around. Sophia had nightmares. I tried to explain as patiently as I could that their mom had gone to live far away and couldn't come back now. Every question was a knife in my chest. Aunt Cora helped distract them with stories and little games, but Larissa's absence was a gaping hole in their lives. It was during that heavy climate of grief, loss, and tough adjustments that the truly strange events began. It wasn't sudden, like a bolt of lightning. It was slow, creeping in like dampness staining a wall. It started with sensations, a constant chill down my back even during the hottest, muggiest days. A cold that seemed to seep up from the floor at night, chilling my bones without explanation. Then came the sounds. Small noises in Larissa's old room, like drawers opening and closing, or someone rummaging through the few belongings she'd left behind. A scarf, a broken comb, worthless items she hadn't taken in her rush. I'd go check, heart pounding, only to find nothing out of place. Sometimes, when I was alone in the kitchen cooking, I'd hear light footsteps in the wooden hallway, as if someone were tiptoeing. But I was always alone with the children, who usually played outside. Ethan was the first to say anything concrete. He woke up in the middle of the night, sweating and scared, and ran to my makeshift bedroom in the living room. "Dad, there's a lady out there near the mangroves. She's calling us." "What lady, son? Must have been a dream. Go back to sleep." "It's not a dream, Dad. She's by the water, hiding in the roots. She sways back and forth and calls to us in a soft voice. It's scary." Sophia, even younger, said the same thing a few days later. They both described a female figure with dark, flowing hair, always near the water, looking sad. Sometimes it seemed like she was crying, silent tears that froze them with fear. At first I brushed it off as them missing their mother, or just their imaginations running wild because of all the upheaval. I had them say the Lord's Prayer with Aunt Cora, left the hallway lantern on all night, even though it meant using up more kerosene. But then I started hearing something myself. On a moonless night, in the pitch-black darkness that only a mangrove swamp can have, I woke suddenly to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was crying. A baby's cry, faint, shrill, pained, unmistakable, like a newborn's. It came from somewhere out in the mangrove, not far off. I got up slowly, the floorboards creaking under my feet. I went to the window in the living room that faces the river and the footbridge. I squinted into the darkness, but saw nothing besides the twisted silhouettes of the mangroves and the dark shimmer of the still water in the channels. Yet the crying continued, a thin, persistent wail that sliced through the night. My hands shook as I closed the window, locked the door, and felt my heart pound wildly in my chest. I went back to the hammock, but I couldn't sleep. The crying echoed in my mind until the first rays of sun colored the sky. It happened again on other nights, not every night, but often enough to destroy my peace of mind. Always in the dead of night, always coming from the swamp. I walked around in a daze, head down, shoulders slumped. Work on the boat became harder. I couldn't focus. I started feeling aches in my body that weren't just from physical strain. Sharp stabs in my back that appeared and vanished without reason, constant headaches, fatigue so deep I could barely stand even if I hadn't done much that day. I lost weight. The dark rings under my eyes became permanent. Aunt Cora, with her keen intuition, noticed everything. One day, as she served me a bowl of fish stew for lunch, she rested her hand on my shoulder and spoke in a worried voice. "Emmanuel, my boy, you're not well at all, and it's not just sadness. There's something heavy in this house, a bad feeling in the air. Sometimes I wake in the night sensing another presence here, and this chill that never leaves. You need a spiritual cleansing, son. You need help." "It's just exhaustion, Aunt Cora, too much on my mind." "It's not just that, Emmanuel. I know sorrow and I know evil energy, and there's something bad here, or at least a sadness so deep it became a haunting. You need to do something about it." I'll admit the idea scared me. I'd never been one to believe in folk healers or curses. My father was a practical man who believed only in what his hands could do and in the force of the tide. But desperation gnawed at me, fear for my children, fear for myself, the sense that I was losing grip on my own home, my own mind. And there were these embarrassing moments when a crushing longing for Larissa would hit me out of nowhere. A crazy urge to go after her in town, beg her to come back, forget everything. I'd recall her smiling, and my heart would clench. Then the rage and hurt would flare again, and I'd feel like a fool for still missing her after all she'd done. I noticed that on the days this emotional storm was at its worst, the strange occurrences at home intensified. The baby's crying got louder, the children were more scared, and that invisible presence felt stronger. Aunt Cora didn't give up on the idea. She brought it up again, more firmly. "Emmanuel, listen to your old aunt. Across the river, past the broken bridge, there's an old woman, Miss Zena. She's lived here forever and knows all about the local plants and prayers of protection. Folks around here respect her. They say she can deal with bad energy, restless spirits, curses. Go talk to her. What do you have to lose? This can't get any worse than it already is." I hesitated for days. I kept picturing my father, so skeptical, so down to earth. But then I thought of my children's frightened faces, my own reflection in the mirror, a man wasting away from anxiety. That won out. On a cloudy morning, I left Ethan and Sophia in Aunt Cora's capable hands and took the boat. I rowed toward the broken bridge, a place I usually avoided for being so desolate. The current felt stronger. The wind blew against me. I felt a huge weight on my chest, a voice in my head telling me to turn back, that it was all nonsense, that I was losing it. But I kept rowing, driven by a desperation stronger than my doubt. Miss Zena's house was small, made of old boards and clay, almost hidden by native vegetation. The air smelled heavily of herbs and smoke. She was sitting in the doorway, a very elderly woman, skin wrinkled like tree bark, but with eyes that were startlingly bright and penetrating. She watched me arrive without any surprise, as if she already knew who I was and why I'd come. "Come on up, son. Tie your boat and sit a while. The tide's been bringing a lot of bitterness your way." I sat on a low stool she offered. Then I started talking, and I couldn't stop. I told her everything from the beginning. My initial happiness with Larissa, her gradual change, the painful betrayal, my expelling her from the house, my loneliness, the children's fear, the grieving, the strange visions of a sad woman, the baby crying out in the swamp, the body aches, the exhaustion, the sudden waves of longing for Larissa followed by rage. I poured it all out like a dam breaking. Miss Zena listened in silence, calmly puffing on a little clay pipe that let out puffs of herb-scented smoke. Her gaze never wavered from mine. When I finished drained, she was quiet for a while, her eyes on the distant line of mangroves. Then she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "There's a deep root of bitterness sunk into your home, Emmanuel. Something left there in anger, wanting you to crawl in sorrow. That bad energy, that venom of feeling, opened the door to something older. These mangroves hold many stories, plenty of people's pain, lost souls of folks gone too soon or babies who never made it. The sad woman your children see isn't someone recent. She's a suffering spirit from a bygone time, drawn to places where grief and desperation linger. And that crying baby, it's a sorrowful echo that never left, awakened by the negative force in your home. Your ex-wife, in her anger, tore this door open. And you, my boy, with your pain, hurt, and longing, are feeding these shadows without realizing it. They thrive on your weakness." She didn't use the word witchcraft or curse. She spoke of energy, of bitterness taking root, of open doors, and of ancient spirits haunting the mangroves drawn by pain. Coming from that wise old woman with her piercing eyes, it felt terribly real, more so than any logical explanation I could muster. Miss Zena took me to a tiny room at the back of her house, a place saturated with the smell of dried leaves and damp earth. She gave me a cleansing bath with dark water infused with prickly herbs that seemed to scrub something from the inside as much as the outside. While she poured it over my head with a gourd, she chanted softly, in a language I didn't recognize, but that sounded ancient and powerful. Then she made me drink a dark, bitter tea tasting of roots. Finally, she handed me a small pouch of rough fabric, tied shut with a waxed cord. Inside, I felt seeds, maybe small stones, perhaps an animal's tooth. "Carry this with you always in your pocket. Don't let anyone else touch it. It'll seal your spirit, give you strength. And pray, Emmanuel. Pray however you know, with faith. Ask for protection from the higher power that rules all this. Clean your house. Burn garlic skins and rue leaves in the corners. Open the windows. Let the sun and wind come in and sweep out what doesn't belong. And the hardest part, my boy, try to clear your heart of this grudge. Forgiving isn't forgetting the wrong. It's breaking the chain that ties you to the past and the pain. Let go of what no longer serves you. Otherwise, the darkness will always find somewhere to cling. I rode back home slowly, feeling utterly exhausted, but with a faint spark of hope in my chest. I told Aunt Cora everything. She listened intently, nodding. Over the next few days, we followed Miss Zena's instructions. We smoked the house with the herbs she'd given me, the strong smell soaking into everything. I opened all the windows, letting the harsh midday sun flood in and chase the shadows. Aunt Cora prayed more loudly and often, placing a cup of water and coarse salt behind the main door. I carried the little amulet in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder. It wasn't a sudden magical cure, it was a daily struggle, trying to keep my mind from dwelling on anger or longing, focusing on the present, my kids, my work, praying in my clumsy way for strength and protection. Gradually, very gradually, things began to change. The baby's crying grew quieter, more distant, until it vanished. The kids stopped mentioning the sad woman, and they started sleeping through the night in their own beds. The strange chill in the house lifted. The air felt lighter, easier to breathe. I felt stronger, less burdened. The aches in my body disappeared. My sleep improved. One day, a few months later, Gil brought me news when I was in town. He said Larissa was living on someone's couch, a distant cousin, in another fishing community. Ryan had vanished the moment he found out she was expecting his child, left her alone with nothing. According to Gil, she was struggling, too ashamed to ask her family for more help. She sent a shy message through him, asking if I could spare some money for baby supplies. I felt a torrent of emotions, anger, pity, a bitter taste of justice served, and then shame for feeling that way. I told Aunt Cora, who fixed me with her tired but wise eyes. Life asks for its debts, Emmanuel, but don't rejoice in someone else's misfortune. That brings more trouble. If your heart tells you to help that baby who's done no wrong, then help. But don't open the door of your home or your life for her again. That chapter is done. The chain Miss Zena helped you break, don't let it be forged again. I followed her advice. I sent some money via Gil, enough for necessities. I did it a few times when the desperation messages arrived, not out of love or guilt, maybe out of pity, or out of knowing that child would be half-sibling to mine. But I never saw Larissa again. I never replied directly to her notes. I never let her approach my home or my side of the river. The door that closed on that painful day stayed shut. Today, life goes on like the tide that ebbs and flows. Ethan is already a young man, quick to pick up the secrets of fishing, proudly helping me on the boat. Sophia is the house's sunshine, chatty, smart, deeply attached to Aunt Cora, who's still with us, solid as a mangrove root and our safe harbor. The house still bears the marks of the past. The memories still hurt sometimes. The mangrove out front remains mysterious, with its nighttime sounds and its deep shadows. On a very still night, if I listen closely, I sometimes think I hear a distant echo of lament in the breeze, but I've learned not to pay it any mind. I focus on the quiet prayer Aunt Cora taught me. The scars of betrayal and fear never go away completely. They stay in your soul like net marks on your skin. But I've learned that you can live with them, and that the strength to move forward comes from faith, from the love of those who remain by your side, from honest work, and from the peace you fight to rebuild inside your heart. Aunt Cora always says the greatest protection against any evil is a clean conscience and a heart unburdened by hate. And that's what I strive for day after day, here in my own spot, listening to the call of the river and the sea, grateful to have survived the tide of bitterness. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.